Yesterday alone, BlackRock bought 4 times the amount of daily mined supply of Bitcoin, right, into the IBIT fund. And that's one fund. You got to get to 1 Bitcoin. If you're not at 1 Bitcoin, time is, I keep trying to say time is running out. And in my heart, I kind of feel that time has run out. You either get to 1 Bitcoin or you're trying, and you're about to see what TradFi is going to do to this space. Some people will like it, some people won't like it, but it is what it is. Bitcoin is here to stay. Bitcoin is certified. Bitcoin is backed by the President of the United States of America at this point, and the biggest, baddest asset managers on earth.
Yo, what's up, dude? British HODL, absolute legend. One of the fastest growing X accounts and fabulous YouTube content as well. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, my friend?
Doing really well. Great pleasure to meet you and the family a few days ago.
Yeah, that was an epic party, man. That was a great way to end the year. Epic 100K celebration.
Great Gatsby party at Bitcoin.
Yeah, man. It was crazy because I grew up in Miami. So like, I always thought like, okay, this whole Bitcoin thing, it's going to take me everywhere else. But it's like, no, the 100K party of the century party was literally in my backyard. So that was pretty crazy, but it was fun, man. It was an incredible party. Had such a great time. Great to see you in person with your friend as well. But we ended 2024 extremely strong. And I think that's where I'll start the conversation. Like, what were some of the highlights of 2024? What were the most like significant things that stuck out to you? And then we'll move on to 2025, of course, which I think is going to be absolutely explosive. So what do you think, HODL?
Yeah, I think that we started the year off with the ETF approvals, which were 4 years too late as far as I'm concerned, because I got into it in 2020 thinking they were coming that year. But that was fantastic. And then, I thought that was going to be the highlight of the year pretty much. And then it turns out the President of the United States had different plans. And then he announced, obviously, that he is pro-Bitcoin and started getting on the Bitcoin bandwagon. It was not on any one of my predictions that the President of the United States of America would be pro-Bitcoin, would then stand next to a senator that is filing, putting forward a bill for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And then on top of all of that, go on to win a complete and utter landslide of an election in the United States. So those were my two highlights as far as Bitcoin goes. Was the ETFs, and then the President Trump coming in and putting his stamp of approval on Bitcoin, basically.
Do you think that played a Do you think that's? It's, of course, he's about to be sworn into office in 13 days. Do you think that played a significant? Do you think that's a significant milestone in Bitcoin's history in terms of its potential price action going into this? Well, I mean, we are in the new year, but in 2025, how do you feel about that? Like, how big of a deal was it that Trump is pro Bitcoin? And I'll caveat that with saying this. The Biden administration really dropped the ball, because I don't think Bitcoiners would have gotten into the political discussion, but we were forced because our industry was under attack. Operation Choke Point 2.0, the proposed 30% Bitcoin mining tax, the attack on self-custody, all the stuff that was going out that they were doing behind the scenes to essentially try to destroy our industry, like, forced us. And then that created an opportunity for Biden's leading political opponent to capitalize on it. And then what you said, Trump having the consciousness to look into it and say, hey, you know what? Like, I'm going to need all the votes I can get. I'm going to tell them exactly what they want to hear. Free. And I saw the thought process. It was first with CBDCs. Yep. And then he gauged the audience. The audience was like, yeah. He was like, CBDCs. Yeah, I'm against that. And then he was like, Bitcoin. And then he was like, free Ross. And he was like, wow, I really like this. And then he spoke in Nashville, and he's like, I'm going to fire Gary Gensler. The audience went crazy. And then he was like, I'm going to say that again. I'm going to fire Gary Gensler. So, and this is what politicians are supposed to do. They're supposed to pander, right? But he did have the wisdom to realize, this is a significant demographic that I want to vote for me in this upcoming election. So anyways, I'll preface it with that. Huddle, floor is all yours.
Yeah, for me, I don't think. Okay, I want to say this, but I want it to be clear. I don't think it was important for Donald Trump to be pro Bitcoin, but I think it was extremely important for the president of the United States to be pro Bitcoin. I hope that makes sense. I look at these two people as two individual characters, as two individual separate entities. It just so happens that in this moment of space time, they are the same person, right? I think Donald Trump has the perfect personality to lean into Bitcoin and to assist the adoption curve of Bitcoin faster than any other potential human being that could be president. But I do not think it was essential for Donald Trump to be pro Bitcoin. I think it was very essential for the president of the United States to be pro Bitcoin. And we have that now. We have those two compounded benefits here because, Donald Trump has an amazing ego, which the Bitcoin price action will be utilized to support that ego. The president of the United States has the ability to certify an asset as a strategic reserve asset, as a this is now here to stay asset, et cetera, et cetera. And we have both now. There is absolutely no more conversation on is the United States going to shut down Bitcoin? No. The answer is no. If you're sitting there going, oh, the United States might shut down Bitcoin, you have got your head stuck so far up somewhere where the sun doesn't shine because you've not only got the president of the United States behind it, every single appointee is now pro Bitcoin. There are people, senators dropping like flies because they're not pro Bitcoin. Bitcoin is here to stay. And again, from my perspective, I started shouting about this in 2023 when BlackRock entered the game. Because what did we think was going to happen? You think BlackRock got into the game and the president of the United States was going to be anti an asset that BlackRock was going headfirst into? It's just not going to happen. There's a way that this game works. And it's working out. It's working out. It's moving, obviously, from a Bitcoin perspective. It's going to move a little bit slower than what we're used to because we're all addicted to the crack cocaine of Bitcoin's price going up and down. But that's not really how TradFi assets work, right? So Bitcoin is now becoming an adopted TradFi asset. And as a result of that, it is going to go through its process. It's going to be a little bit slower than I think what most people want to see. But it's going to be a grind up, and it's going to be a grind up forever.
So it's really interesting you say that, Huddle, because you're actually the second person in 2 days that has told me the same thing. And essentially, the TLDR is because Bitcoin essentially, since the ETFs were approved, it's become a TradFi asset. To perceive that it's going to behave the way that it did before the ETF's approval is a bit naive. Now, as a Bitcoiner, I'm class of 2016. I love the volatility. It was like part of the process. And that's a little bit bittersweet for me, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously with the volatility, you get the 500x in a year, right?
Yep.
Are you making the case that those days are over and it's just going to be a slow 30 to 4% compound interest, over the next 10 years? Are you trying to make the case that the cycles are over? It's this new age in Bitcoin. What are your thoughts?
I'm saying that probabilistically, the cycles have to change at this point because I don't think BlackRock wants to put $50, $100 billion of their clients' funds into an ETF or a product that then skyrockets 400% 1 year and then crashes 80% for the next 3 years. I don't think that's conducive for TradFi's intentions when it comes to their own purposes. And their own purposes are very simple. Their own purposes is to make fees. So why would they want to see $50 billion go to $250 billion, make that fee for 1 year, and then watch it come back down to $80 billion for the next 3 years? It doesn't make sense. They would rather that AUM value of IBIT grind up slowly, and in the meantime, suck as much Bitcoin as they can out of the hands of the people that they can suck it out of. And as you know, the best way to get Bitcoin out of people's hands is to bore them to death, right? And when you bore someone to death, eventually they go, "Oh, screw it, I'm going to go and buy a car. I'm going to go and buy this," and that's when you've got them. You've got them when they decide to get out of the asset. And I think that's what BlackRock is excellent at, and that's what that'll be the agenda. I don't think there's incentives to really having an asset go up and down the way Bitcoin has. It just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong, but the only way I'd be happy to be wrong is if we went up 300% and then stayed there. I can't see the downside volatility making a lot of sense to the TradFi community. I can't hear you right now. Maybe you're muted.
I did mute myself. Sorry, my baby girl's in the background, so I'm trying to cancel that out. But how much influence does BlackRock have in? How much influence does BlackRock have in controlling the price cycles? Because what I'll say, Hodl, is one of my favorite essentially things. One of my favorite tweets about Bitcoin or sayings about Bitcoin, which is governments think they're going to be able to regulate Bitcoin, but in fact, it's Bitcoin that's going to regulate governments. And I'm applying that same train of thought onto BlackRock. Like, yes, BlackRock's going to come in there and they say, you know what, we're going to change the game. We're going to change the cycles. We're going to dampen the cycles. But Bitcoin, they don't call it the honey badger for no reason. So could you explain to our audience, like, perhaps they're not as well versed as you are in like the traditional markets, like how does BlackRock dampen the volatility? How do they get rid of the cycles? Like, what are the mechanisms behind that?
Yeah, like let's say if you see an asset go up, let's say Bitcoin goes up, I don't know, to $400,000 a coin, and you do not want it to crash down to $90,000 a coin again. It's very simple. You call your bond desk up if you're BlackRock and say, figure out how to get MicroStrategy $20 billion. And then you call MicroStrategy and say, right, the best implementation plan for this is probably going to be, $300 or $400 million a day for the next couple of years. And now you have a price floor. It's very, very easy, right? And if you notice, there's only one person and one entity that Michael Saylor has ever talked about competing against in terms of the amount of Bitcoin, and that's IBIT. There's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for that. So, there's many ways to control the price of an asset, especially one that has absolute finality of scarcity. So put it like this, they can't really control the upside, but they can absolutely dampen the downside. And they can't control the upside because if everyone in the world just woke up tomorrow and said, I want some Bitcoin, they're out of luck, right? But if everyone in the world starts to sell, now they can absolutely put capital in place that would eat up that sell side. And we've seen it now, in the last dip that we had just before we hit New Year's Eve party. Do you think if they could smash the price down to 70,000, they would have? They absolutely would have, but they couldn't, right? Because you got players in the game that are just sucking up this Bitcoin every chance they get. So, and MicroStrategy is one of them. Right, let's not forget, one of the biggest shareholders of MicroStrategy is BlackRock. So this is all these are multiple different flywheels that are being set up. And the unique thing about Bitcoin compared to real estate is that you really can have a flywheel of the ETFs being impacted and helping the flywheel of MSTR, which is being impacted and helping the flywheel of the options market, which is being impacted and helping the flywheel of the convertible bond market. Like everything interacts because it is just still one underlying asset with absolute finality of scarcity. It is not like real estate where BlackRock can say, I'm going to get into Florida real estate. And now you've got the whole state of Florida to play around with, right? We've basically taken the idea of everyone trying to buy one street of real estate and move that all around the entire world at the same time. That's what Bitcoin is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about the upside, right? So you're saying we're not going to have these crazy 80, 70, 60% corrections. That's bad for business for BlackRock. You know, they want the boomers, they want these high net worth individuals to have a good experience. Now, let's talk a little bit about the upside, because I think this cycle specifically, you know, the general kind of theory that I'm seeing is, you know, we're going to peak at 100, 150K, 200K. I think it's a little bit bearish, British HODL, because like, I think 2021 was a major letdown in my opinion, because I think that what happened was the China mining ban artificially cut the cycle short. All those miners had to sell Bitcoin in order to relocate to more favorable jurisdictions. And that was in the middle of the run up. I think we were destined to hit 100K. We really haven't had a blow off top in Bitcoin since 2017. I think people forgot what that's like. So I'm hearing the general consensus is 120K, 150K, 200K Bitcoin. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, dude, that's boring. That's less than 100% gain in a year. And if you look at Bitcoin's historic performance, it tends to perform the best the year after the halving, which is 2025. So all the explosive gains should happen this year if Bitcoin continues to follow its cycles. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but you got to remember that's based on 4 data points, right? Like that's only based on 4 data points. So it doesn't have to be like that again. I think it will. I think we are going to see some kind of explosive growth here. The question that I have is, you know, the real problem is that I feel like and especially in the party that we're in, there was a lot of people having the conversation of, you know, I'm going to try and take some profits on the top and wait for the price to come back down and try and, you know, add some more Bitcoin at the bottom of the market in 2026. That is the part that gets me scared right now. Right? When someone says that gets me scared. I have zero problems with massive upside volatility and a controlled downside, right? I don't think any of us have an issue with that. But the people that terrify me are the people that have worked very, very hard for a long period of time, who have secured their Bitcoin, and now, because of 4 data points, are so confident that the cycle is going to work out exactly how they think it's going to work out, where they're going to try and take some off the top. And then the United States is going to announce a strategic reserve, and then MicroStrategy is going to announce $100 billion worth of convertible note financing, or all these other things that are going on. And if that happens, you know, if you're in the US or you're in a taxable account, I don't pay taxes because my tax residency is in Dubai. But if you're in a taxable account trying to look at people on the internet trying to do this, you know, the moment you sell, you've basically guaranteed yourself a 20 to 40% bear market. And if it never gets that low, so think about it. Let's say you sell at 100,000 and you've got, just to keep it very, very simple, I'm going to assume all of it's profit, right? And you've got a 40% tax rate on that. Well, now it needs to get down to 60 before you're even at an advantage position, right? So now let's say it gets down to 55. Well, you need to bottom tick that 55 number. You have to buy it at 55 in order to maximize that. If you don't do that, you're basically getting away with a 3 or 4 or 5% advantage, in which case, what's the point? So my mission really at this moment in time is to make people realize that maybe selling at the top to try and take some of this profit off the table that you think you're going to do because you're so fancy and lucky is not really going to work out, simply because the game has changed. Now, people always said this time it's different, and it's never different. But think about what's changed here. You've got BlackRock in the game now. You got Fidelity in the game now. You got the President of the United States in the game now. You got the whole branch of government in the United States is now in the game. Their egos are now attached to the price point of Bitcoin. You know, and it's like, and you think that you think that is going to be favorable for you if you try and trade that? It doesn't make sense, right? So I don't think most people, and you know, most people don't even understand how options work. So when you're when you're buying options and you're hedging with options, the market maker has to go and hedge that position, and they hedge it by generally going long on your position, which means that there's automatic controlled downside built into the market through the delta hedging function on the options. There's just too much incentive to not let the price go down as much as it has. That's where I start. I don't actually start to the upside. I start thinking about it to the downside. Like, what is the incentive for any of these people to allow the price of Bitcoin to go down 85 to 90%? And if they're not going to do that, well, then let's say a 50% correction happens. That is an order of magnitude shift from what we've seen for the last 4 cycles, right? For the last 3 cycles. In which case, you really now have to start thinking about it going, well, if there is an order of magnitude shift and I've got a 40% tax rate and the market only goes down 50%, I have to bottom tick the exact bottom to make a 10% advantage. What's the point? Right? And what is the risk that I'm putting up here where I might sell my Bitcoin and then President Trump announces this SBR and now the price goes straight vertical. So now I've cost myself 40% in taxes. Now I've got to buy the asset back too. Is it worth it? I don't know. That's a personal question that people are going to ask.
Of course. And it's an important question to ask too, right? And that's I think that's really the question is this time different? And I would say, the favorable regulatory environment in the United States, the massive win by Trump, the fact that the Republicans control the House, they control the Senate. It's officially part of their party platform to protect the right to self-custody, protect the right to mine, be super favorable for Bitcoin, not to mention whether it's Sachs or Lupnick that are being part of the administration. Lupnick was on Pomp's podcast not too long ago saying he's going to buy tens of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin and then $100 million worth of Bitcoin. And this guy was just named, the head of commerce, essentially. Right. So, and then you have the president's son making a historic speech in Abu Dhabi at Bitcoin Mina, where he literally is talking about Bitcoin as if he understands it on a fundamental level. And that's the president's son. Right.
Yeah.
So
and guess who one of his best friends is?
Hit me with it.
Michael Saylor. They've known each other.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because there was a picture that he posted with Michael Saylor at Mar-a-Lago a couple days ago. And what do you think and I'm very confident that Saylor met Trump. And what do you think they talked about? There's nothing else in that conversation to talk about, right? Other than a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Okay, so there's that. I want to tell you about the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. I'm talking about bitcoinwell.com. What makes bitcoinwell.com different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, meaning as soon as you buy Bitcoin and the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. And that perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state. Support Bitcoin on-ramps that are self-custody by default. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com today. It takes 2 to 5 minutes to sign up, and bada bing, bada boom, you're ready to buy Bitcoin. Then there's the approval of the ETFs. Then there is this dynamic between the states. Multiple states are talking about introducing legislation, or they have introduced legislation about rolling out a strategic Bitcoin reserve on the state level. Then it's happening on the federal level with Cynthia Lummis really on the vanguard there, moving that forward. So this time could be different because all of those things were not true. In my era, 16, 17, and when Bitcoin crashed, from $20K to $3,500, one of the coping things that we used in 2018 was the institutions are coming. That was bullshit. The institutions were not coming. They were not there. Since January of 2024, the institutions have been here, and they've been acquiring a massive amount of Bitcoin. And you've done a great job covering this. So could you give the audience kind of like a breakdown of how much Bitcoin have they been acquiring? And Also, talk a little bit about they're essentially buying all of the supply. Like, they're buying more of the supply than is being mined on a daily basis, right?
Yep.
So could you talk a little bit about that? Because eventually one thing's got to break, and then it breaks to the upside, because if there's not enough Bitcoin if there's not enough Bitcoin being minted, if not enough Bitcoin being made, then it, goes to the market. And if the market doesn't want to sell at 100K, then, the price goes up. That's how markets work, right?
Yeah, look, yesterday alone, BlackRock bought 4 times the amount of daily mined supply of Bitcoin, right, into the IBIT fund. And that's one fund. So, yeah, we are approaching a time period where, look, there was going to be this buyer rotation that's going to happen. And I saw it happening as soon as the ETFs came out. There was going to be this rotation of owners from people who sort of saw the opportunity early in Bitcoin. If you've held Bitcoin since it was $100 and you want to sell some at $100,000 to reward yourself, reward your family, et cetera, buy a house, whatever you want to do, I'm completely for that, right? At the end of the day, you gotta take a portion of that Bitcoin and make your life good. You have one life to live, and we have 21 million Bitcoins. So your life is actually rarer than Bitcoin is, believe it or not. So you gotta enjoy that. You gotta reward yourself. However, you have to be very conscious as to who's on the other side of that trade, right? So while it's good and well saying yes, you should enjoy your life and do that, on the other side of the trade are people who have their houses, people who have new cars whenever they want them, people whose kids have gone through school, people who don't need money tomorrow. They don't need wealth to be made in the next 5 years. They've been rich for what seems like forever. These people are in it for the game. These people are in it because Larry Fink is calling them saying, we need you to get an allocation into Bitcoin. These people are in it because they have wealth that they want to protect. They're not in it for the riches that are coming next week because Bitcoin's gone up from 100,000 to 200,000. They don't care. They don't give a shit. They're in it because they want to maintain the value that they've accrued, and Bitcoin seems to be the way to do that for them. Since their BlackRock or Goldman Sachs or whatever else advisor called them and told them that. So that's who's on the other side of the trade, right? And this process is going to take some time. People always say there's enough Bitcoin to sell. There's enough Bitcoin to sell. Sure, there's enough Bitcoin to sell at a certain price. And we're at that price point where psychologically, I can completely understand someone who's owned Bitcoin since it was a couple $100 selling some at 100,000 because they're in it for 2 cycles now, right? I think 2 cycles is sort of like a psychological breaking point of like, okay, I'm going to just hold on, I'm going to hold on to my Bitcoin. 2 cycles later, 8 years later, I'm going to take some money off the table. I'm going to enjoy my life. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. 8 years is a long time for people to wait, right? Especially if you don't have those things. But the new buyer has all of those things. They already have the cars. Like, as I said, they have the houses, they have the family, everyone's set up. So they will hold for a very, very, very long period of time. And as you've seen, the only time BlackRock really had an outflow was at the end of the year when they were doing when there was tax harvesting and tax loss sales and things like that going on. So these ETFs are sucking up more Bitcoin than the miners can produce, sucking up more Bitcoin than the network can put out. And at some point, that's going to come to a head, and which is why if you're not at 1 Bitcoin yet, you've got a very, very short period of time. You got an SBR coming up. You got all these things happening, and genuinely, I feel like if you're not at 1 Bitcoin yet, you should be the most panicked person on Earth right now.
Is 1 Bitcoin enough, British Hodl? Like, is 1 Bitcoin enough to live a decent, respectable life in the developed world?
We got to get to 1, and then we can get to 2.
No. But seriously, like, is 1 Bitcoin enough? Like, let's say, 15 years from now, is 1 Bitcoin enough to live a good lifestyle?
Yeah, I think so. I think 15 years from now, Bitcoin's sitting at above, $5 million a coin, $100 trillion market cap. I think you will have the ability to generate income on that holding. And if you've got a $5 million position, I think you'll be able to make enough money to have a really good life. So yes, I think one Bitcoin is enough with the developments that are coming in from the TradFi markets to Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what's your famous line? I absolutely love it when you say this.
You buy step number one, you buy Bitcoin. Step
Yeah.
number two, you hook up, and step number three, you get fabulously wealthy.
Oh man, I absolutely love that. Yeah, you made that line go viral, and I think it's so powerful because it's so true. It's so simple, so simple. People, because they're so used to dealing with traditional finance that like overcomplicates things by design to justify the fees and all that stuff. Like we're super smart, so we're going to tell you all this lingo that you don't understand. Um,
Even though we take the train to the office every single day, and you drive up in a Benz or a Rolls Royce, yeah, it's
exactly.
complicated.
Exactly, but they got to justify the fees somehow, right? But Bitcoin comes along and it kind of really really disrupts that, and I want to talk a little bit about that, right? Because whether it's real estate or tradfi, there's these entire industries that are built on this. The real estate industry, like real estate in general, is just the valuations of properties are just so overinflated because people are using it to essentially invest, and fiat has just turned the world upside down where people are forced to become part-time investors just to maintain their purchasing power. Now here comes Bitcoin and it completely changes that conversation. Do you foresee the next 10, 15, 20 years the prices of real estate going down? Because it's already been going down if you're using Bitcoin as your unit of account. But I guess the question I'm asking is, do you see the premium on real estate going down, essentially it being reallocated from real estate as people realize that real estate is an inferior investment than Bitcoin, an inferior asset? And as more people realize that, they sell some of that real estate to get into Bitcoin. Do you foresee that happening?
Yeah, I see that happening, but I think the way they'll do it is just borrow more money against their real estate and buy the Bitcoin with it. So that's what my parents did. So I think that's going to be the way that it shakes out. I do, however, see one of two options for real estate at this point. Either the real estate prices are going to come down, or you're going to see an environment where you see real estate prices stay stagnant for a very, very, very long period of time while earnings and wage inflation catches up with that to shrink the inequality gap that's been created due to the high real estate prices. So I think that's definitely going to happen. One of those two things. Either way, that what that means is either way you're going to see a dollar destruction of value based on the price of your real estate if you own, single family homes and things like that, or you're going to see a dollar stagnation of value in terms of price for a very long period of time. There is no way that you can keep the economy running at these real estate prices. It is rather at the growth of these real estate prices. So you're going to have to control that in order to stay in power. Otherwise, people are gonna get really pissed off. The good news about Bitcoin is that if you are TradFi, you can utilize Bitcoin to do all of these things that you were doing with real estate, printing money and shoving it into an asset that really doesn't move. And you can do it with Bitcoin without taking your foot off the pedal, right? Because there's no one jumping off of a building. There's no one, crying about losing their house. There's no debt to lend out. There's nothing. It's basically a few a few big players that are doing this with their already highly linked and highly juiced in tradfi products that are out there, and you keep it going. So that's the way I see it. I see that the pedal is about to go to the floor on the amount of money that you can print and liquidity you can generate, and it's got a new avenue to go into because I think real estate has been completely pumped and it's about to be dumped.
Yeah, and then let me ask you something else, Otto. Like, what would you like for And I'm assuming we're very similar to the same age or roughly about the same. Um, like, I think a lot of us are in this situation where, this is my third cycle. I got a Bitcoin in 2016. And, I think we're all like asking ourselves this question where, you obviously, ideally you never sell your Bitcoin, but you do need a place to live,
Yep.
right? You do need a place to live. And it begs the question, like, am I ever going to sell this Bitcoin to buy a house, or am I just going to stay renting, or am I just going to stay in this thing? Because Bitcoin does give you that escape, but it's almost as if it's a very stupid idea to do so. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, does it come to a point where you're just like, Nico, you know what? Just take 10% off your stack. Just, buy a house, reach that peace of mind, or do you just recommend against that completely? Do you think that eventually, I was talking to CJ the other day, and he was talking about releasing a product where essentially you're able to collateralize your Bitcoin, use that as a backing to essentially get, to use that to, as a collateral to mortgage a home. What would your advice be to people, especially our age? Because, of course, you used to be able to buy a house in your 20s, but with all the manipulation of the financial system and money and the 2008 financial crisis, I think the very idea of owning a home is out of the hands of most people in, most millennials, I'll say. And then Gen Zers, it's completely gone. Forget about it. It's like, I feel like that generation is just the way that the system has treated that generation. It's like they're destined to be, essentially just like, I heard a broadcaster say this the other day, like Russian serfs, even their own, the propaganda coming out of the Contillionaire Conference, aka the World Economic Forum, they're even telling you you'll own nothing and be happy. They're trying to normalize this in your head, So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think everyone needs a home, right? Especially when you have a family. I think everyone needs a home where you can build from, where you can go to war from, where you can go and attack the world from. However, the flip side of that is the world is changing so fast. Like, for example, right? I moved part of the reason why I moved to Dubai was that it sort of was like looking like it was going to be the Bitcoin future country, right? They were gonna be super advanced on Bitcoin. They were going to lead the way, et cetera, et cetera. A few years ago, we would have never guessed that the United States of America was going to be the premier jurisdiction for Bitcoin and digital assets. But that happened, right, in a very short period of time. So I think that buying a house is fine, and I think everyone should get a house, especially once you have a family. But you have to balance this idea of like, well, what if the sea just completely changes? Like, what happens if am I going to be trapped by this house in an environment which is not conducive anymore for my progression, right, or the progression of my children, right? In your case, what you're going through. So I would say there's multiple layers to that question. For example, I would much prefer, if I was going to choose to buy a home, I would much prefer to choose to buy a home somewhere in America or Dubai than the United Kingdom, which is my home country, right? Because the sea has completely changed. Now, what happens in 10 years if the United Kingdom figures its shit out and now says, right, we're going to completely just open up on Bitcoin and becomes the premier Bitcoin jurisdiction inside of Europe? Like, what happens in that scenario? So now I've got this house, and the question I've got to ask myself is, by buying that house, am I now trapping myself to being in this jurisdiction? Because I think one of the biggest advantages of this world that we live in is being able to move jurisdictions and get closer to the action within practically the speed of light, right? Bitcoin allows us that. All of these things change depending on whether you have family, how old your children are, et cetera, et cetera. But I think being able to move around, being able to be flexible, being able to take advantage of different situations and different developments that happen is going to be the superpower, because proximity is power in every scenario. So the fact that, one of the reasons why I made the trip to the party that we were at, one of the reasons why I wanted to meet you was because we've done some work together on YouTube. But guess what? Proximity is power. FaceTime is important. No matter what we think about each other on over the camera, in person, you can really feel someone's energy, right? And that's what it's about. And I would highly urge people to really think about that when it comes to buying a house. It's like, can you just wait? Because you don't know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. If you can just wait 5 or 10 years, I think you should. Because I think that in 10 years, the future of Bitcoin is going to be pretty much set, right? We're going to know exactly what's going to happen. Right now, there's so much new things happening, right? So I will buy a house at some point. I will not consider it part of my investment portfolio, but I want to wait till the right opportune moment to do that. And I don't think that's this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be part of your investment portfolio. It should be a utility, right? And then again, the system has Frankensteined it from a utility to an investment vehicle, which it shouldn't be, right? So yeah, I think that's great advice, right? And I agree. I think if you have the time, and I know a lot of Bitcoiners are in their 20s, like just wait it out and hold it down and delay that gratification, So I want to double back to what we were talking about earlier on in the conversation, which is, this is 2025. This is the year of the parabola. If Bitcoin's history repeats itself, what are you expecting from a price perspective, right? Like, what are you expecting 150K, 200K, 300K, 400K, 500K? Because I know that, a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but I'm sure that you have, some expectation in your mind.
I think that we're going to several hundreds of thousands of dollars per coin. I doubt whether we will reach above $500,000 a coin. And all of my thought processes in my mind go out of the window if a SBR is approved in the United States with a commitment to purchase 750,000 to 1 million coins. Everything I'm saying becomes irrelevant, and we have to wait and see if that gets approved. And the reason for that is this. The moment the US, everyone's looking at it going, oh, the US SBR. What you don't realize is the moment the US SBR is approved, so are 20 others.
Yep.
Right? Like Russia's got an SBR immediately. China has an SBR immediately. The United Kingdom has an SBR immediately. Europe has an SBR immediately. Every G20 nation has an SBR immediately as soon as the US one is approved, because they have to, just from game theory perspective. So to me, it's more about like, okay, so if that doesn't happen, then I think we get to several hundred thousands of dollars a coin, but I think it's going to bore people to there. If it does happen, all my thoughts are completely invalidated, and now we sit and wait and see what happens. At that point, you lock into the trenches, you hold on and hug that Bitcoin as tight as possible, because now the Jekylls are coming to incentivize you to get rid of that Bitcoin because they want it.
And what do you think is, so the Polymarket odds put it at 40%. What are the odds that this SBR thing comes to fruition?
Well, again, it's like, how has an SBR come to fruition? So I think it's highly likely that Trump says, we're going to commandeer all of the Bitcoin that the US government currently has in its possession and put that into an SBR. I think that's very likely. What is the probability of a announcement that we are going to launch an SBR, commandeer these 250,000 coins, and then buy another 750,000 to a million coins? I think it's high. I think it's higher than Polymarket's current odds. I don't know whether it's as high as 50%, but let's just go right in the middle. I think it's a 50-50 toss-up whether that's a real strategic reserve. Real strategic reserve is when you start buying up stuff. And yeah, I think it's pretty high based on the rhetoric that's going on, based on what everyone understands Bitcoin to be in the administration.
And do you like, let me ask you something else, right? Like, so if a strategic Bitcoin reserve comes to fruition, right? Again, I think I agree with you. All bets are off. But let's say it doesn't happen. Like, are you still thinking, a couple $100,000 per coin without the SBR? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, I think we're in the region of 300,000 without an SPR.
Gotcha. And you said that the 2026, by the way, you're not the only person who said this. You said 2026 is going to be like everyone's expecting this bear market, 60, 70% correction. You're making the case that with BlackRock stepping in, they're not going to want that for their clients. So
Yep.
will we get a correction like normal in because
Yeah.
that's what happens usually, but you're saying 20, 30% max.
20 to 50% is my range. I
Gotcha.
think it would be more than 20%. I think it'd be less than 50%. If it hits 50%, it's going to be very, very short lived.
Yeah. Yeah. And then people are
Just go look at what happened. All you got to do is go study the chart of gold from 2004. Right? There was intra, and by the way, I think we could have those corrections, and we could have 10 years of positive years on Bitcoin. So we could have a 50% correction in July, for example, and still finish the year up, 40, 50, 60% every year for the next 10 years.
That's crazy. That's absurd. That's
Yeah.
absurd.
But it happened with gold. And the only reason it stopped with gold, by the way, is that, I was in the gold space. So the only reason it stopped with gold is because it took 8 to 10 years for investment to go into gold mining to bring out more gold from the market in order to match the demand that was coming. So you don't have that issue with Bitcoin. You can't just, no matter whether there's, $100 billion of demand or $100 trillion of demand, you cannot mine more Bitcoin. So therefore, you can keep this thing going up for a very, very, very long period of time. And if gold was 8 years, you could have a very, very solid, decade and a half, 2 decades here with this asset now, with these ETFs and the TradFi players in place.
Yeah. And no, it's oh man, it's really exciting. And I don't think you can get, so your advice to people would be don't trade it. Do whatever you can to accumulate. What are your thoughts on MicroStrategy? So like, and the reason I'm the way I'm framing this question is like, if I sold all my Bitcoin, I would never do that. But let's say theoretically I did, at the last bottom of the bear market when we were at 16K, and I took all that capital and I put it into MicroStrategy, I would have outperformed Bitcoin by a factor of 5 or 6. And I would have more Bitcoin today than, I wouldn't have. What's your advice on, is that trend going to continue? Like, is MicroStrategy going to continue to outpace Bitcoin's performance? And if it is, why should people buy Bitcoin if they can just buy MicroStrategy?
Yeah, good question. So anytime you're thinking about a portfolio, you got to think about it based on risk. And so for me, I want the majority of that portfolio in the least risk directional bet. And that is Bitcoin and cold storage, right? So on the majority in that. Now I want to take a layer 2 position. This is how I think about my portfolio. I want to take a layer 2 position, and that layer 2 position is going to be maybe 25, 30, 35% of the remaining 50, where I'm going to go and put it into a leveraged instrument. And that might be MicroStrategy, for example. And then I want to take the remaining amount and just go balls to the wall, as high leverage, as high potential return as possible, which is obviously super risky. But then that allows you, if it works out, like, you're buying, let's say you're buying call options on MicroStrategy at the 200-week moving average, right? That is a very, very strong directional bet, and it looks like it's going to pay off. But if it doesn't pay off and you lose that 100% of that allocation, the rest of the portfolio makes that up. That's how I would personally think about it. If somebody's looking at MicroStrategy going, this is, can this continue to outperform? The answer is absolutely yes. MicroStrategy is a vehicle to turn Bitcoin into, or you basically, yeah, turn Bitcoin into a speculative platform for traders and hedge funds and market speculators to play around with. And the most important chart on MicroStrategy is actually the 30-day implied volatility chart, not the share price chart. So that's what you want to look at, because that's what
Could you explain why that is? Like, why is that chart more important?
because the product that MicroStrategy is selling is volatility. The market has been very starved of volatility. They see these one or two assets every decade that has these volatilities, and it's like a Tesla or an Nvidia or whatever else, and it lasts a few years, and then they eventually screw it up, and then the volatility comes crashing down because the market is saturated. The difference with MSTR is their volatility is basically twice as much as Bitcoin, and the market is hungry for it, and it can continue forever, because as long as Bitcoin is volatile, the MicroStrategy will be volatile. And if you're a convertible bond trader that's not getting any volatility in any other convertible bond product, now MicroStrategy looks like the only option that you have in order to generate, the profits that you want to generate. And if, as long as you're doing that, now they're taking that convertible bond money and buying more Bitcoin with it, which means as the Bitcoin goes up, the share price is more volatile, because now you've got speculators on the share price. So that's the loop that MicroStrategy's created. And in order to understand it, you've got to see it as a growth company and not a de facto Bitcoin ETF. And the question is this, how long will it take for the market to realize that the only reason they were investing in Tesla and Nvidia is because they wanted the growth, and it wasn't because they wanted the electric cars? That's the question, right? Do we really want electric cars? I don't know. I feel like Elon Musk has created a great environment to do something good for the world, potentially, and at the same time created a volatile asset that everybody can get into, right? But what did you really want? Did you want the electric car? Did you want the GPUs? Or did you actually just want the growth? Well, MicroStrategy is giving you that growth, safer, faster, more efficient than Nvidia or Tesla or any one of these fast growth companies. And soon enough, in February, in 3 weeks, you're going to see their earnings come out, and their earnings are now going to demonstrate actual earnings from their Bitcoin appreciation.
How do they get earnings from their Bitcoin appreciation if they don't sell it? How does that work?
Well, because the value of the asset's gone up. So the FASB rule changes. What's actually happened? Yeah, the FASB rule changes basically meant that you had to price Bitcoin like an intellectual property asset. So, for example, let's say you owned an intellectual patent on a drug, and you bought the patent for $50 million, right? And let's say you had the possibility to turn that $50 million patent worth $200 million because you found viability in that drug. Well, no matter what you did, under the FASB rules, you could not reprice the value of that patent to 200 million. So on the books, you have not earned that extra 150 million. However, if tomorrow it all fell apart and that patent was now worth 25 million, you had to mark down the value of that asset to 25 million. Think about that. That's what Bitcoin has been going through until these FASB rule changes in December. And February is going to be the first time where MSTR can say, we've got these, 450 whatever thousand Bitcoin, and this is how much they've earned us in the last quarter.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, right? So now think about this. Now that happens. Now, this is the first time in MicroStrategy's history since owning Bitcoin that they can be judged on a price to earnings basis. First time, because their Bitcoin has no earnings right now. So people say, oh, but these hedge funds are smart. They know that there's earnings there. They'll get into the trade. And these people don't understand how the market works. You've got to be able to justify with research why you placed that trade if there's ever an SEC inquiry. So yeah, they might be able to place small trades. They're not going into anything significant without FASB rules changing and there being earnings filed by MSTR, because they cannot do it. They will be lambasted for doing that. So in February, that changes. So let me put this into perspective. If you judged MSTR's price to earnings ratio right now, it's about a 6. If you judge Tesla's price to earnings right now, it's 112.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. If you judge Palantir right now, right? Palantir is this new hot stock that everyone's going for because they think it's going to be massive growth, et cetera, et cetera. It's 400.
That's crazy.
Right.
That's nuts.
Right. The average PE on the NASDAQ is 47. And we're sitting at 6 on MSTR. We're sitting on 6 at MSTR while the Bitcoin price hasn't even rallied. So why do you think Saylor took that 21 bill of ATM and just went balls to the wall on acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible in the final quarter of the year? Because he knows, I got to get this much Bitcoin in, because then first quarter, when that price takes off in the first quarter, this is now all earnings.
That's crazy. That's wow. Oh man.
So the question
okay, keep going.
So the question is, anyone who's holding Nvidia, anyone who's holding Tesla, why are you holding the asset? Is it because you really give a shit about electric cars? Or is it because you want growth of your capital? And my goal now is to see how long that takes to flip the switch. Because the moment that happens, you're going to see a rotation of capital, just like Tesla experienced. In 2019, Tesla went through this. Just go look at the monthly chart of Tesla and go look at 2019, and you'll see that they went through a reallocation process as soon as every Russell 2000 hedge fund manager said, we need Tesla. This is growth. What happens when that happens with MicroStrategy?
You don't think it's happened yet? It's up 500x?
No.
Oh, wow.
We haven't even started yet. Again, it goes back to what I said. They can't even judge it as a growth company yet. They can't even judge it on a price to earnings basis. The models they have, they can't even put MicroStrategy in there and justify it as a trade yet.
That's crazy.
Because there's no earnings.
That's so crazy. Wow.
And here's the crazy thing. If you're an analyst and your job is to pitch the idea of, I want to get into, 10% of our fund into this trade. Well, if I'm doing that for NVIDIA, look at what I've got to think about. I've got to think about, okay, this is the new technology that they're coming out with, these chips. This is where they're going to manufacture them. This is how much potential demand there is. There's probably going to be Apple buying them, Intel buying them, Microsoft buying them, whatever. This is the viability for this Chinese or Taiwanese factory to actually make this asset. This is the ability for NVIDIA to sell it. These are the competitors involved that are also trying to compete with this new product that NVIDIA is going to create. All of these things I got to think about, model, before I can future project a price to earnings goal on NVIDIA due to this new product. So MSTR tells you, we're going to take $1 billion today and we're going to start putting it into Bitcoin tomorrow. I don't have to worry about marketing, product development. I don't have to worry about sales. I don't have to worry about anything, because I give them $1 billion and they start growing that tomorrow. So now they've reduced the return on investment cycle by 1,000 days compared to a tech company like Tesla or NVIDIA. So now it's more efficient to get the growth through MicroStrategy, not through all these other companies.
That's absurd. And but eventually these other companies are going to realize, right? And eventually they're going to get on the Bitcoin gravy train. But you think, and I think that's the long-term thesis, right? Is that all these companies are not going to have a choice but to adopt a Bitcoin treasury strategy, or else they're going to get left behind.
That's not true. They'll just have to get better as companies, right? Because if a company really does come out with something that's truly remarkable, they'll still be invested into. It's just right now, look how much over bloating we have in technology, right? In technological development, right? Like the fact that everyone's got an iPhone and it just basically, this latest one has a thinner bezel. I mean, come on, what the hell are we giving these guys money for?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That inefficiency that's pursuing the growth will find a better way to generate growth, and that will be MicroStrategy. That's the difference. So there's going to be a repricing at some point on all these companies that have been faking the idea of growth. But the main question is this, right? What happens when companies realize what MicroStrategy is doing? Well, the question is this: can anyone else strip down the company to basically zero? And MicroStrategy's worth right now, right, is basically its Bitcoin volatility. It's not really its software business. The software business is making 500 mil a year, right? The company's worth 88 billion or whatever it is. So the question is, can anyone else catch up with the purest form of Bitcoin volatility in the equity space? And the answer is no, because no matter how much you try and catch up, the moment you buy Bitcoin, MicroStrategy's volatility goes through the roof because they own the Bitcoin. And in their next earnings, their earnings go up because they own the Bitcoin before you. You cannot catch up. MicroStrategy is one. It is a one of one. It has got the first mover advantage, and it will keep it forever. So all these other companies can do it, but the volatility will be higher on MicroStrategy because it's a pure Bitcoin play. Mm-hmm. And because of the volatility, it will drive the most interest from the market makers who want that volatility.
This is fascinating stuff. Okay. And then, we are getting to the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time, British Hodl. Why haven't we, and that was enlightening stuff, man. That was such a great breakdown. We're in the new year, 7 days, a week into the new year. And we're still sitting at $96,500. I know we broke 100K yesterday. It felt nice. What gives? I think we were all expecting, a Prana at least to be at 120K Bitcoin right now. What's going on?
Yeah, I think there's a continuing rotation of buyers and owners here. We have seen long-term holders bottom out. They're selling at this point. James Van Straten was. Have you had James on your show yet?
Not yet, but sounds like a great guest to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think James is a good guest for you to have because he's a great on-chain analyst. And I think we're just basically seeing a rotation of buyers here. We're seeing capital that's sitting there. By the way, none of this is to do with Bitcoin, because if you ever think, okay, something's happening in Bitcoin, all you got to do is go look at the chart of the NASDAQ. If the chart of the NASDAQ is reflecting what's going on in Bitcoin, it's nothing to do with Bitcoin. It is an overall market action that's happening. And that's what's going on here. We've got overall market action. Capital hasn't, it's going in, it's coming out, it's being a bit hesitant, let's say. And so we're going to see whether we're going to run up until the election and then have a little bit of a pullback, or whether we're going to go sideways until the election, get the election done, and then go straight through the moon.
Do you mean inauguration when you say election?
Inauguration, I apologize.
So, yeah, I mean, but you are bullish for the end of the year. You think it's going to be great. You think it's going to be incredible. I'm bullish
for the next 2 decades. At the end of the year. This is now, we're in a different world now. We don't look, I don't think about this as an end of the year thing. We have now entered the twilight zone when it comes to Bitcoin now. And you're about to see the power of TradFi. The thing that I pray for is that Bitcoiners that have been in this longer than I have, longer than, maybe even you have, hold on. That's the thing that I really want. I don't want people to, put in all this hard work, sell out at 500,000, $1 million because it's boring. Because remember, these guys know the value of this thing, right? They know real estate is worth $330 trillion in the world, right? You sell Bitcoin at, $13 trillion, or you buy Bitcoin at $13 trillion. From their perspective, they've still got almost a 10x left. No, what am I talking about? 30x left. Yeah. Right? 13 trillion is the market cap of gold. They're looking at this like real estate.
That's crazy, man. Man, British Hodl, I always enjoy you coming on the show. You blowing my mind like always. And it seems like the audience loves it too. They love when you come on the show, man. So it's an honor to have you back on. This is the second Simply Bitcoin and British Hodl interview. And hopefully in a couple months we'll do round 3. And hopefully the Bitcoin price is at 150K at that point. So it's an honor to have you on, my friend. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, what you're doing, what you're working on these days, and how they can stay in touch with you?
Listen, firstly, I want to say thank you for having me back. It was a pleasure to meet you, meet your family at Sailor's Party. And I want to thank the team that's behind Simply Bitcoin, putting this all together, making us both look really pretty. I think that's they're doing the real hard work. As far as getting in touch with me, just go to YouTube, type in British Hodl, and you should be able to find this face talking a lot about Bitcoin. On Twitter, it's at British Hodl, or X, sorry. And come and hang out. Look, at the end of the day, you got to get to 1 Bitcoin. If you're not at 1 Bitcoin, time is, I keep trying to say time is running out. And in my heart, I kind of feel that time has run out, if I'm being honest. And but again, that will be my core mission: getting people to 1 Bitcoin as quick as possible. You either get to 1 Bitcoin or you're trying, and you're about to see what TradFi is going to do to this space. Some people will like it, some people won't like it, but it is what it is. Bitcoin is here to stay. Bitcoin is certified. Bitcoin is backed by the President of the United States of America at this point, and the biggest, baddest asset managers on earth. So now it's just a case for me and Nico to sit here looking pretty and just watch this unfold at this point.
Oh man, well, it's definitely exciting times. Really, really excited for this year. And Hodl, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you. It's an honor.